May 13th, 2026, the South Carolina Supreme Court made a decision that shocked a lot of people. In a unanimous 5-0 ruling, they threw out Alex Murdaugh's murder convictions and ordered a new trial. Hello and welcome to the Dr. Suzette Glasner podcast. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. And if this is your first time here, I'm Dr. Suzette Glasner. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and an addiction scientist at UCLA. And I have served as a forensic psychological expert witness in criminal cases involving addictive behaviors, which is why the recent developments in the Alex Murdaugh case really piqued my interest. If you followed this case, and millions of people did, you may remember that in 2023, a jury convicted Murdaugh of the unthinkable, killing his wife and his youngest son, who was age 22, at their hunting property in South Carolina. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, and the case really seemed closed. But the court found that the trial was tainted by the actions of Becky Hill. Becky Hill was the county clerk of court, who the justices described as placing her fingers on the scales of justice. Hill has since pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, perjury, and misconduct in office. Becky Hill admitted to leaking sealed court exhibits to the media and using her position to promote a book she had written about the case. The Attorney General has vowed to retry Murdaugh aggressively, and as Murdaugh's team begins to prepare to go in for a new trial, I want to examine 2 things that I think have gotten lost in all the true crime coverage. The first is the psychology of familicide, which is our clinical term for the killing of a spouse and 1 or more children. How Alex Murdaugh's profile looks when you line it up to what is known from forensic psychological science about the profiles of individuals who commit these types of crimes. Second, I want to address the opioid addiction defense head on, because as an addiction scientist, I have a lot of opinions about it, particularly the claim that opioids made Alex Murdaugh paranoid, which is how he explains having lied to the police about his whereabouts at the time of the crime. And that is not how opioids work. And I'm going to explain exactly why. Why don't we just start with a little bit of background about the case, just a refresher in case you don't know too much about it. Alex Murdaugh comes from a very influential, prominent family of attorneys in South Carolina, going back decades, as many as 80 plus years. His grandfather, his father, and himself were in high positions in the court. As chief prosecutors for over 85 years combined, the family had deep authority in South Carolina, in Hampton County in particular. They were known and respected and even feared. Underneath that image, Alex had been stealing from his personal injury clients and his law partners for years. So a few examples: he was settling cases without disclosing it to his clients, embezzling legal disbursement funds, intercepting insurance payouts, and laundering stolen money. Ultimately, an estimated $12 million at least in fraud. Now, fast forwarding to the murders, on June 7th, 2021, Alex called 911 at around 10 p.m., claiming he'd come home to find his wife Maggie and his son Paul shot dead at their hunting property. Paul had been under significant legal pressure. That's Paul, his youngest son, who was found deceased. He was facing criminal charges and civil lawsuits related to a 2019 boating accident in which a close friend of his girlfriend's, Mallory Beach, was killed. Alex initially told investigators that he had been at his mother's house for the entire evening and had not been at all at the kennels where the bodies of his wife and youngest son were found. The critical evidence that really facilitated the murder conviction for Alex Murdaugh was a video on his youngest son, Paul's cell phone. This was timestamped about 20 minutes prior to the 911 call, which captured Alex Murdaugh's voice at the kennels with Maggie and Paul. So Alex had lied to the police about his whereabouts and the fact that he had been at the scene of the crime shortly before the crime occurred. In terms of the financial fraud connection, within days of the murders, investigators started to unravel Alex's financial crisis, a massive years-long scheme stealing from grieving clients, settling cases without their knowledge, and keeping the proceeds. This is important context for understanding motives. So Alex was facing imminent financial and professional collapse. The prosecution argued that the murders were designed to buy him time and to provide a distraction and create sympathy to sort of lead the investigators away from the financial fraud. Now, the trial took place in February and March of 2023. Alex took the stand, which is unusual in a murder trial, and he did admit lying to the police, but he used his opioid addiction and what he referred to as paranoia that was a consequence of his opioid addiction, leading him to feel suspicious of the police investigators and to lie to them.
Were you, in fact, at the kennels at 8:44 p.m. on the night Maggie and Paul were murdered?
I was.
Did you lie to SLED Agent Owen and Deputy Laura Rutland on the night of June 7th and told them that you stayed at the house after dinner?
I did lie to them.
But he denied committing the murders. The jury deliberated for a few hours, 3 hours, convicted him of 2 counts of murder, and sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms. Familicide is the killing of a spouse or intimate partner and one or more of their children. It's distinct from killing one's child or killing one's spouse. And part of the reason that it has its own term is because the research suggests that it has its own specific psychology. So a recent scientific investigation synthesized 67 studies from 18 countries and described the profiles of individuals who have committed this unthinkable act. And the consistency of the profile characteristics and the sort of life circumstance characteristics relative to Alex Murdaugh is actually quite striking. So let's go through it. First, across virtually every study in the review, men are almost exclusively the perpetrators of these crimes. So when they compare familicide offenders to what we call filicide offenders, so somebody who kills their child but not also their wife, the offenders not only tend to be male, but they also tend to be older. And Alex Murdaugh was 52 at the time of the murders and highly educated. And we know that that's the case with Alex, who is an attorney and a very accomplished one. Other characteristics of offenders are mental health difficulties and personality disorders. So on the mental health side, depression, up to 69% of offenders, of familicide offenders, have depression. And in particular, narcissistic and dependent types of personalities are prominent, appearing in up to 65% of these offenders. Now, regarding depression, we don't have a specific diagnosis of depression from a psychologist or a mental health professional for Alex Murdaugh, but we do know that opioid addiction often occurs concurrently or at the same time with clinical depression. One of the many related shockers in this case, was 3 months after the murders, Alex Murdaugh arranged for a former client of his to kill him in an assisted suicide. And though the role of depression versus potential personality issues like psychopathy or being a psychopath in this is questionable. Depression may have played a role. The reason that I'm referring to psychopathy or psychopathic tendencies in relation to this planned murder of himself is that there is evidence that this was yet another insurance fraud scheme to enable his surviving son, Buster, to collect a $10 million life insurance payout. Ultimately, despite having been shot at by his client as planned, Alex Murdaugh survived and faced further legal troubles as a result of having tried to stage his own murder. But it does shine a light on potential depression, and we do know that familicide offenders tend to be at heightened risk of suicide attempts after they commit these murders. Regarding personality, while he was never diagnosed by a court-appointed psychologist, his own surviving son, Buster, has noted that Alex Murdaugh displays traits of psychopathy and narcissism. And of course, there's no denying that the extensive schemes of lying, manipulation, and theft from vulnerable individuals who were injured and grieving in his law practice reflect the personality tendencies of those who have psychopathic and narcissistic traits. Now, another common characteristic is financial difficulties. This is observed in up to 86% of cases in which familicide is committed. In Murdaugh's case, his entire scheme was unraveling, leading down a path to financial collapse. So he certainly is consistent with this criterion. Now, relationship problems and separation are also present in up to 85% of individuals who commit familicide. And we do know that his wife sought out a divorce attorney's advice about 6 weeks prior to the murders. On the other hand, a spokesperson for Alex Murdaugh refuted claims of any marital discord and said that he and his wife had a very loving relationship. So this is sort of unclear, but it certainly has been suggested that there was marital discord on at least one front. And finally, a history of domestic violence appears in up to 92% of offenders. It's unclear that this was the case with Alex Murdaugh. We don't have any clear evidence of that. Now, in terms of motives, here's where relationship issues and personality really intersect. Research studies show that fear of abandonment and narcissistic rage are often prominent motives in familicide offenders. So if it's true that his wife was contemplating leaving him, then that would align with the known triggers of these crimes from forensic psychological research. What's striking to me about the Murdaugh profile is just how many of these boxes he checks. So his age, his level of education, his personality characteristics, at least to the extent that we know what they were, and the set of life circumstances around the time of the murders, particularly the financial difficulties, are all consistent with what is known about familicide offenders. Now I want to turn to the opioid defense. Here's what Murdaugh claimed on the stand: that he had decades-long addiction to opioid painkillers, specifically oxycodone, that he was taking what he described as up to 60 pills per day in the months leading up to the murder. Crucially, he said that his addiction caused what he called paranoid thinking, and that paranoia is what made him lie to the police about his whereabouts at the time of the crime. In other words, his brain was impaired or broken by opioids, and that's why he acted guilty. So let's just start with the 60 pills. The body can adapt to a remarkable amount of opioid doses over time. So I'm not saying that that's impossible, but it's worth noting what a staggering figure that is. So the closest I've seen to that is Matthew Perry, who noted that he was taking up to 55 pills daily to avoid going into withdrawal. So was Murdaugh similar to Perry, whose life clearly fell apart, who went to inpatient treatment, all different kinds of addiction interventions in his 50 years of life that we haven't heard about with Alex Murdaugh, whose family was devastated and in a chronic state of worry about him? I haven't heard much that aligns with the life of somebody who's taking that much opioid medication for whom usually things start to fall apart by the waysides. Alex Murdaugh's brother said he had no idea that he had an opioid addiction, and it would be really hard not to know if somebody was taking that much opioid medication and had been doing it for 20 years. So either they were really good about staying private about their problems, or there's something missing in this story.
As my addiction evolved over time, I would get in these situations or circumstances where I would get paranoid thinking. It could be anything that triggered it. It might be a look somebody gave me. It might be a reaction somebody had to something I...
Now on to opioids and paranoia. So opioids work primarily on the mu opioid receptors in the brain and the body, and their pharmacological effects are sedation. A person who is on high doses of opioids will mostly be tired, sedated, nodding off, feeling numb or not feeling pain if they're working, respiratory depression, very high probability of overdose on super high doses continuously of opioid medications. And at a neurochemical level, these are considered central nervous system depressants. Paranoia is sort of the clinical opposite of what I just described around the effects of opioids. When somebody is paranoid, their central nervous system is not depressed. It is activated, and it is sort of hyperactive in a way. So this involves, it's basically the highest end. If you look at anxiety on a continuum, you have anxiety that makes you nervous. Paranoia is sort of an extreme form of anxiety because you're so nervous that you believe irrationally and out of touch with reality that people are out to get you, that they're trying to harm you, that they're a danger to you, and that you need to protect yourself. And so we usually see paranoia in conjunction with a completely different class of drugs, not from opioids, which are a central nervous system depressant, but from substances like stimulants. So we're talking cocaine, methamphetamine, certain types of amphetamines, and I haven't heard any mention of Alex Murdaugh having used those types of drugs, although it's not impossible. But the mechanism is completely different. So stimulants flood our dopamine system. They cause a massive surge in dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter or brain chemical that leads us to feel reward and a certain sense of alertness. And in pathological excess, the symptoms, including paranoia and hallucinations and agitation, can occur. So that's why methamphetamine psychosis can look like schizophrenia, because the brain is being overstimulated and loses touch with reality. This is really kind of the opposite of what happens with opioids. So opioids reduce anxiety. They dull your fear responses. They blunt emotional reactivity. They make people feel depressed. So I don't see this argument holding up in any logical or science-backed way as to why Alex Murdaugh lied to the police about his whereabouts. So what Alex Murdaugh described, the specific claim that opioids made him paranoid about investigators and made him lie because he was suspicious and fearful, that is not a pharmacologically coherent description of opioid intoxication or opioid addiction. If he had said that opioids impaired his judgment or reduced his impulse control or distorted his emotional processing, those are plausible claims, but paranoia specifically, it's really a mismatch with the drug class that he's talking about. I'm not claiming that opioid addiction cannot change an individual's personality or the way that they behave. It can, but usually it's the pursuit of opioid medication when a person is in withdrawal and some of the behaviors that are socially undesirable that can go along with that, like lying and stealing and things like that, all because the brain is telling you that you need more opioids. Those are some of the ways that we see personalities and behaviors change in an individual who is addicted to opioids. But paranoia is really not among them when it comes to that particular drug class. So as the retrial planning ensues, I think that the familicide offender profile, as well as the opioid addiction defense, really need to be seriously re-examined. I hope that you learned something new and interesting about this case, and I look forward to seeing you next time.